Okay, I've spent the last 2 weeks with the just announced flagship phone from Sony, the Xperia 1 Mark IV, and you can tell very quickly that this company is now fighting to make something special. So, the question is, can Sony, a smaller 5,000 employee phone company with a lot of ambition, actually beat a huge 300,000 employee mainstream smartphone company like Samsung? Let's find out. Well, you're not getting much of an unboxing experience either way. Just like 50% of flagship phones nowadays, you get nothing with this phone. Except, in this case, like literally nothing. Not even a cable.
But when it comes to the smartphone itself, you really do get the continuous impression while using it that Sony is actually trying to just make the best phone that they can. They put a 4K display on here that's 50% more pixels than practically any other phone. And when it comes to brightness, this thing is not 20% or 30% brighter than last year. 50. Sony's speakers were already great too, but now they've further upgraded the bass and the volume to the point where, you know that traditional tinny phone speaker sound? That's gone. Their last phone had a weak selfie camera, they fixed it. They've given us a headphone jack, a dedicated camera shutter button. This is one of the very few flagships that supports micro SD cards. And I love the fact that they've made the SIM tray completely toolless, and that they've made the matte finish on the back practically immune to fingerprints. It's just thoughtful design.
And really, that didn't sound good. It's the main benefit of Sony being a much smaller company. You get the distinct feeling while using these phones that they aren't as commercialized as Samsung's. That this device was not created with the mindset of, right, how do we sell 50 million units this year? And how do we get people to sign up to every single one of our services? But instead, the simple goal of, how do we improve the last one? How do we make the best phone for our Sony community? I mean, just look at it. The Xperia 1 Mark IV looks practically identical to the 1 Mark III, which looks practically identical to the 1 Mark II. You can tell that Sony isn't playing the game of, we've got to make sure our phone looks different every year and add flashy new colors to make it seem like a more noticeable upgrade. Either that, or someone needs to have a word with the marketing department. But there is another side to this coin. See, while having a smaller team can give you the autonomy to add in nice personal touches just because you feel like it, there is also a very distinct advantage to scale in the smartphone market. Like, because of how Samsung's operation is an order of magnitude greater than Sony's, it gives them the budget to, one, invest far more in research and development, to be able to create features that are not just new and innovative, but can also be internally tested millions of times before actually being put on store shelves, to make sure they're also reliable and optimized. And two, support devices for longer. Like, if you look at the most profitable smartphone companies out there, Samsung and Apple, they're also the companies that give the most consistent software updates, 4 years and 5 years respectively, compared to Sony, who'll probably do 2. And it's not that Sony isn't trying as hard, it's just the nature of their lower sales volume makes it much less time efficient to match the bigger companies. They'd have to put in the exact same amount of manpower and resources to create an update, but it's only going to benefit a 20th of the number of people. And you can argue that this support, this optimization, this reliability is kind of the biggest factor in a smartphone success. Like, if you really think about the phones that have truly failed over the years, the Red Hydrogen 1, the Nextbit Robin, the HTC Evo 3D, none of these flopped out of a lack of intention. They all had very strong visions. It's just they weren't backed by the resources and the investment power to deliver on them, thanks to the immense and increasing complexity of a smartphone. So, that leaves us with an obvious question. Can you feel it here? Compared to Samsung's top-end flagship, does this feel any less optimized and any less reliable? Well, 90% of the time, not in the slightest. And if you're enjoying this, then a sub to the channel would be so nice. This is a pacey smartphone with fluid animations, super responsive gesture navigation, and the sheer tallness of its screen makes it an absolute beast for all those scrolling apps. My thumb feels positively liberated from how much less work it has to do here. Plus, Sony has absolutely smashed the core content consumption experience. The combination of this cinematic 4K screen, these new and improved speakers, dynamic vibrations that physically shake the phone when there is bass, it's in some ways an unmatched phone for experiencing YouTube and Netflix. Games look great too, and they feel like they wrap around you with this ultra-wide display. I wouldn't call this a phone for gamers, because I have noticed some pretty high temperatures if you push it, but for moderate gaming it's beautiful. And of course, this camera system is in a lot of ways quite special. You might well know that in the market for professional cameras, Sony's Alpha brand is somewhat of a leader. Like, this is a Sony Alpha camera. This is a Sony Alpha camera. And so the fact that this Xperia 1 Mark IV is apparently using tech from these cameras is, well, it's enough to give me the tingles. And you know what? This thing does deliver an extremely reliable focusing system, like alpha cameras. It can burst fire like a demon, taking 20 photos per second. And they've added an absolute truckload of creative visual effects to play around with, like partial color, which is really cool. It lets you pick a color, and then only that color will be highlighted on screen. And the one thing that this does better than any other phone in the market is slow-mo. I honestly don't think any other company cares, to be honest, but on the Sony, you can take slow-mo videos in 4K resolution. And it's pretty much the only phone on which you could then also watch those back in full quality. But okay, the camera is also a pretty good place to talk about where this phone goes wrong. Here's the thing you need to understand. Sony's alpha cameras are phenomenal. I can't knock that. But if you really think about it, Sony's ability to make incredible professional cameras, it has almost no bearing on their ability to make great mobile cameras. 95% of what makes traditional cameras good is their hardware, their huge custom sensors, their full-frame lenses. It's not the technology. Their incredible hardware means that they only need very simple software compared to what most smartphones use. And so this idea of bringing over alpha technology to a phone, which is using a very standard tiny phone sensor, all of a sudden it doesn't feel like such a bonus. In fact, in most cases, while the Sony does take good, clean, natural-looking photos, it doesn't hold a candle to the intelligence of a mainstream flagship, made by a huge team of people, like the S22 Ultra. To capture the kind of photo that we've almost come to expect on a 2022 smartphone, it actually takes a lot of work behind the scenes. Like, every shot requires the phone to take 10 or so different frames at multiple exposures and mesh them together. It requires it to identify people's faces and adjust them based on the skin tone and the environment. It requires tons of sophisticated micro adjustments that I just don't get the impression this Sony is making as much. When you take a photo on this Xperia, for the most part, what you see is what you get. Which, you know, there was a day where that was a compliment, but not when you compare it to the S22 Ultra, which, after capturing, will literally comb through every single pixel in the image, sharpening bits, tweaking colors, and improving lighting. And this software processing, it's important when you're taking zoom photos. The S22 Ultra will detect text, for example, and use artificial intelligence to neaten it up. It's important when taking action shots, where the Samsung will realize that you're doing a lot of moving and cleverly take multiple shots and pick the stillest one. It's important when you're taking video. The Xperia lacks that powerful high dynamic range that these mainstream phones have. It's important when you're taking portrait mode shots, where Sony's edge detection and artificial background blur, they still feel a little basic. And it's really important when you're taking night photos, where your phone has to capture many frames and then use machine learning to piece them together into a single brighter shot. Now, I will give Sony this. They have successfully distilled the look and the feel of using an alpha camera into this phone. All the menus, the fonts, the sound effects, and I understand it. I could totally see the loyalists who love Sony cameras really appreciating this authentic touch. However, to be really brutally honest, interfaces are pretty much the worst thing about professional cameras. I love my Sony Alpha camera, but let's be very clear, if I could swap its UI for Android 12, I would do it in a heartbeat. I mean, look at this, beautiful home screen, slick menu operation, material design, everything's bright and colorful. But the second you open the camera app, you feel like you've jumped back 10 years. And the layout isn't as intuitive as more mainstream phones either. The camera experience is split between not one, not two, but 3 separate camera applications. It doesn't respond to gesture navigation like the rest of the phone trains you to do, and like, why is it that if I want to use portrait mode on the rear camera, I click this button and then this button, but then to do portrait mode on the front camera, I go into a completely separate menu? I want to reiterate here, this is not a bad camera. And in fact, its ceiling is just as high as Samsung's, but it's just that lack of behind-the-scenes grunt, it doesn't leave you any room for error. If you don't get that perfect shot in the moment, this phone isn't going to save you. Now, the final 2 things that I want to quickly point out are that 1, while this screen is way brighter than Sony's last phone, it is still noticeably less bright than Samsung's. And 2, that my battery experience hasn't been amazing. The capacity's great at 5,000 mAh, but on an average day of usage, I'm getting about 6 hours of screen on time, which is okay, but then if I push the phone by testing its camera, it'll end up as more like 4.5. This is early software, bear that in mind, but to be honest, all this stuff is quite consistent with my experience of other Sony flagships. Again, presumably because of slightly less thorough optimization compared to larger corporations. So the thing to take away from this is that the Xperia 1 Mark IV has merit. There are legitimate reasons why you might want to buy one. For example, it's absolutely top-class media experience. But compared to a flagship from Samsung, who, it's very clear, build their smartphones by constantly keeping the average consumer in mind, it's very clear why Samsung phones sell more than Sony phones. And I would still be more likely to recommend someone this over this. Now, if you are in the market for a new phone right now, there's a pretty good chance you've been checking out lots of different stores, signing up for multiple services, and handing out your data like it's everyone's birthday. But let me ask you a question. Do you have any idea how many companies hold this data? And more importantly, how to get it back? A lot of people assume that at the point where they delete an app from their phone or deactivate one of their social media accounts, their data just disappears. But the truth is, unless you specifically write to a company and exercise your right to be forgotten, all of your sensitive personal data, address, phone number, credit card, everything will just sit on this growing number of servers from every single thing you've ever signed up to. And, well, it goes without saying, the more servers, the higher the risk of a leak. This does happen quite a lot, and these data breaches involve the private information of hundreds of thousands and sometimes even millions of people, all exposed to scams and online crime. Okay, this is what mine is trying to counter. They're the sponsors of this video, and their app gives you a visual summary of exactly which companies know what about you and how to get it back. So, if I sign up with my email on saymine.com, I can see that 861 companies are holding my personal data. Who on earth is Come with Daddy? So I can just click on this company card, it'll tell me what type of data they hold, the risk level for a data breach, and then I can just hit reclaim if I decide they shouldn't have it any longer. And that's it. With the help of mine, I can send that company a data erasure request from my own inbox. I can see the status of the requests I've sent at all times in the Reclaims tab. They even offer a solution to businesses to help them manage their privacy operations much better and eventually improve the experience for both consumers and companies. So I'll leave a link down below to get started on your accounts. To enjoy the full value of the internet today, you kind of need to be open to giving out your data more and more. That's why you need mine. To check out my experience meeting Apple's robot for the first time, that video is here. Or to see me test the fastest gadgets in the world, that video is here. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.